Aged and frail, he still hoped for a miracle, that the kingdom would have an heir. He had become the last hope of his people, struggling against the storm of circumstances. But he was denied the right to continue the dynasty. And Enrique of Portugal, the Cardinal King, Europe's only ruler of this kind, simply gave up. He appointed a council of 5 regents, hoping they would make the right decision. Unfortunately for the ruling Avis family, this turned out to be a grave mistake. Such things happen in many royal houses. A once flourishing genealogical tree, which had borne fruit for centuries, suddenly withers. In the 14th century, the senior branch of the French Capetians faded into obscurity. In the 15th century, little remained of the Yorks and Lancasters, and by the 16th century, it was the turn of the Avis dynasty. It should be noted that they were also connected to the legendary Capetians, being a collateral branch of the Burgundians. At the beginning of the century, there were no signs of impending decline, as King Manuel the Fortunate had 8 sons from 3 wives. Of course, this was not a harem. The young women had married the King of Portugal in succession. Interestingly, the king's wives were closely related. The first 2, Isabella and Maria, were sisters, and Manuel chose his 3rd wife from the same family, a niece of both. With such an abundance of heirs, the 8th child from his 2nd wife, Enrique, had little chance of ascending the throne. Roles were assigned early on, and it was already clear which titles each boy would receive, so the youngest was directed toward a religious path. This choice was made with far-reaching goals in mind. Portugal's position in Rome was significantly weaker than Spain's, and the royal family decided to raise a future pontiff. Moreover, Enrique differed from many of his brothers with his seriousness, thoughtfulness, analytical skills, and rather phlegmatic temperament. Where force and aggression were required, the boy relied on intellect and resourcefulness, and he succeeded. King Manuel was pleased. It seemed things were falling into place. Enrique's career was on the rise. He became an archbishop, then the Grand Inquisitor, and by the middle of the 16th century, at the age of 33, he was ordained as a cardinal. There had certainly been younger cardinals, but more often, they were much older individuals. The Avis dynasty had reason to hope for their own pope. However, things were not going well in the palace. The royal children, following in Manuel's footsteps, left this world one after another. The grandchildren proved even less viable. Prince João Manuel died at the age of 17. Fortunately, he managed to leave behind an heir, little Sebastian. This 3-year-old boy would eventually inherit the throne of Portugal. The story of Sebastian I is both tragic and brief, and I have already shared it. So, I will only mention that the young man, raised in a chivalrous and romantic spirit, became embroiled in a dangerous adventure in Morocco, where he ultimately met his demise. Aside from Cardinal Enrique, the Avis dynasty had no other direct heirs. It was an extraordinary situation in history. A cardinal became king. Of course, for a man over 65 years old, it would have been wise to marry and try to have children. However, Enrique understood that age was not on his side. He was old, ill, and struggled to move about. The joys of fatherhood were far from his reality. Additionally, Pope Gregory XIII flatly refused to release him from his priestly vows, making it impossible for the cardinal king to marry. The pontiff was playing against Portugal. According to long-standing documents, in the absence of heirs, the kingdom would pass to Spain. And Pope Gregory was closely tied to the Habsburgs. Fully aware that his days were numbered, Enrique of Portugal selected 5 noblemen from the kingdom to form a regency council. The cardinal king was confident that they would identify a worthy successor when the time came. There was a faint glimmer of hope, as there was still one remnant of the dynasty, Antonio, the grandson of Manuel. Although born out of wedlock, his parents, Infante Luis and a commoner, had never married. He still carried the blood of Portuguese kings. However, Enrique miscalculated. When he passed away, the Regency Council chose the path of least resistance. Antonio was not even considered a candidate for the throne. In one of the Portuguese provinces, he had been proclaimed the rightful king. Yet, the council recognized the Spanish Philip II of the Habsburgs as the heir. Antonio attempted to fight for power. Over the years, he received support from Queen Catherine de' Medici and Queen Elizabeth of England. But even Drake's fleet could not help him reclaim the crown. He died in Paris, dreaming of Portugal. As for the Cardinal king, he found his final resting place in Lisbon. In addition to his ecclesiastical role, he was also the master of 4 orders, including the Order of Christ, which had succeeded the Knights Templar in Portugal. Thus, Enrique of Portugal was not only a cardinal king, but also a King Templar.